Should you buy the Polar Vantage M2? Or is it worth spending a little bit more money and getting the Polar Vantage V2? What's up, ladies and gentlemen of the internet? How are you guys doing? Today we're taking a look at Polar watches. We're talking about Polar's top of the line multi-sport watch, the Polar Vantage V2, and we're comparing it to Polar's all new and slightly more affordable watch, the Vantage M2. And we'll look at, all the differences between the two watches. We'll look a little bit at data comparison, comparing, GPS accuracy and heart rate accuracy, and I'll give you my opinion on which one I think is right for you. But I do want to be respectful of your time. So if you just want my quick opinion on, which one of these two watches that I like better, for me personally, it is the Vantage V2, and it has, less to do with feature differences, and a lot more to do with the actual hardware and the watch body itself. But I'm gonna get into, all of that in a lot more detail in this video. And as always, I do like to make it very clear, like right from the beginning, that both of these watches were sent to me by Polar for the purpose of these types of reviews. But Polar did not pay me to make this video. They aren't sponsoring me in any sort of way, and they don't get to see or influence this video in any way at all. And I should also start by going over the prices. The price of the Polar Vantage V2 is $500, and the M2 comes in at $300. So it's a pretty significant price difference. And so what do you get when you actually spend that extra money? Let's dive into 10 of the differences that you might see. And the first one, probably the biggest in my mind, is the watch material and the design. The M2 has a stainless steel etched bezel and buttons and a plastic body, and the V2 has an aluminum housing. The V2 supposedly uses that aluminum housing to amplify the GPS antenna and increase accuracy. Now, both watches have quick release bands, but the V2 is kind of like this custom styled band, and that'll probably be harder to replace. You're probably gonna have to go to Polar to get that. Whereas the M2 has the, generic replaceable bands, and it's just a generic 22mm quick release option. So that'll be a little easier to find. But some of the features that you might notice right away when you kind of bump up to the Polar Vantage V2 is that the V2 is a touchscreen, which, if you follow this channel, you'll know that I typically dislike, but there are some cases where it's really handy. In particular, when you're navigating menu options, it does tend to be a lot faster. For example, I always put my watch into do not disturb mode at night when I'm sleeping, and the Vantage V2 makes that super easy. It's just like a swipe down, and then it's like right there as one of the menu options that you can select. Another feature that you get with the Vantage V2 when you spend this extra money is a slew of additional testing metrics. One of them is Recovery Pro. You have an orthostatic test. They also have a running test, a cycling test, and a jump test. You can learn more about these in the full reviews that I've done for these. But for me personally, I rarely use those recovery test tools. But I do like having them available on the watch. Next thing that I think is fairly important between these two watches is the difference in battery life. You're looking at 40 hours of GPS usage when you're on the Vantage V2 and 30 hours on the M2. And maybe even more important than that is just how much battery life you get when the watch is in just general smart mode, general smartwatch mode. So you're using it on a day-to-day basis. I'm seeing more like 5 days of usage versus, you know, I typically get more like 7 on the Vantage V2. It definitely feels like I'm charging up the M2 significantly more when I'm comparing these two watches. And for me, I don't love having a dead watch. It seems to happen when I actually need it, right whenever I'm heading out for a run or something like that. And so I prefer watches that do have that longer standby battery time. I think number 5, the Polar Vantage V2 actually has some additional sensors. It has a barometer, so it is gonna do a better job of measuring, you know, altitude adjustments. And it also has an ambient light sensor, so it can adjust the brightness of the screen just depending on your general lighting conditions. Next major difference, number 6, is that the Vantage V2 does provide you with running power. I talk about running power on this channel a fair amount, but it's not a true measurement of power. It doesn't have a strain gauge or anything crazy like that, but it does provide you with an estimation of power, which is pretty fantastic to have in a little watch like this. Next small difference, the Vantage V2 does have a compass built into it. So if you're doing, you know, some sort of adventure races or things like that, that might be important to you there. Number 8, hill splitter is a feature that the Vantage V2 has that the M2 does not. That can be fantastic when you're actually doing hill repeats or anything like that, which I suggest that you guys do if you're trying to incorporate those into your workouts. The hill splitter can actually measure those for you and kind of help you keep track of how many hills you've done. Number 9, and this is kind of a small one, the Vantage V2 is water resistant up to 100 meters, whereas the M2 is only resistant up to 30 meters. And then the last one is really kind of data accuracy differences with, you know, both GPS and heart rate monitor. I'm kind of lumping those all into this 10th difference. In my experience, the Polar Vantage V2 was a little bit more accurate as far as GPS goes. Here in this graph, you can see that the V2 in purple and the M2 in blue, and you can probably see, you know, right here from this turn that the V2 was just a little bit more accurate than the M2. You know, again, it's probably not something that I would say is a deal breaker. If you want to save money and get the M2, you're still gonna get fairly accurate distances when you're done with your runs. And as far as heart rate accuracy goes, both of these wrist-based heart rate monitors are not gonna be perfect. You know, you really wanna have, you know, either a chest strap or an optical heart rate monitor higher up on your arm if you're looking for extreme accuracy. But the Vantage V2 does have the newer Precision Prime 2 heart rate monitor that Polar has developed, whereas the M2 has the older Precision Prime heart rate monitor. And that just means that there are some slight color variations that they use, which does kind of help affect different skin tones and things like that. But for the most part, what I saw was, you know, the V2 having considerably less spikes and also a bit speedier to actually lock onto the heart rate itself, you know, as you start your event. Okay, so hopefully that helps you figure out, you know, what are the major key differences between these two watches. And for you guys trying to make this decision, you know, honestly, I would say it probably comes down to how price sensitive you are. $200 is a lot of extra money to be spending on this Vantage V2, but personally, you know, I like the V2 a good bit more than the M2. The M2 does, you know, all the basic stuff that I need it to do in a watch. I just prefer the design and the overall battery life improvement of the Polar Vantage V2. And lastly, you know, no matter what watch you end up with, I'll just encourage you to get out there, swim, bike, run, rinse, and then repeat it all over again. And we will see you guys in the next one.